welcome back to the Homestead Skill of the Month Club. This is a Tuesday chat. On Tuesdays, I try to sit down with a friend and just talk about things that are relevant to our journeys towards homesteading, simple life, simple living, or accountable living, or just being the healthiest and happiest people we can be. Today we have Joanna Fugo back. I hope a lot of you will recognize her because she did all the chats in the first month, which was the topic of planning and preparedness. She's back again for the last of our Tuesday chats in month 2, which is old-fashioned cooking. And we are going to talk today about off-grid cooking because off-grid people have to represent.
Yes, we do.
So I'm also going to tell a story on myself. When we, shortly after Joanna had moved here, I invited her to have a canning day with me. And I was doing chili and I had 2 packages left of goat meat. It was all that I had left in the freezer of the goat meat. And I said, okay, Joanna, if you'll can with me because it's so nice to have company, then I'll split this goat meat and we'll each end up with a can or load of chili for our family. And so I'm starting this process, and my wood stove, with the wood that I had available at that moment, couldn't get my pressure canner up to pressure. And I was frustrated by that, and it had to do with the wood that was available. It had to do with how dry the wood was. But we ended up putting the pressure canner in a wagon. It's a true story.
And pushing it up my hill.
Pushing it up the hill, right? The 2 of us.
It's like a 35% grade.
It's kind of crazy. Yeah. And then moving the pressure canner. So the pressure canner is already locked, right? But it's not at temperature. Moving this pressure canner full of chili onto Joanna's propane stove, which I was really grateful for at that point because your situation with the old-fashioned wood cook stove outdoors was not able to do what needed to be done that day.
But it has canned many a meal and many, many, many beautiful things in your pantry.
True. So let me talk more about the wood cook stove because I know a lot of you are interested in that. I was very intimidated to begin. And I should preface that by saying that I wasn't the strongest cook to begin with. I'm a much stronger cook now than I was before we moved off the grid. But even the cooking skills that I had developed, meal prep skills, the kinds of things we've been talking about this month, like layering flavors and combining ingredients and having confidence with working from what you have. I wasn't completely on top of all of that when we first moved out here. And then the wood cook stove added another challenge. So at first, I actually made a step back from my life in the suburbs of Boston, where I was getting vegetables from a CSA, that's Community Supported Agriculture, lots of organic vegetables and meat directly from a producer, a farm nearby. And I was really doing all from scratch organic food. And then we made this big move off the grid to live in the woods, and I completely reverted to packaged food. Okay, not entirely, but it was definitely a slip back because of the
learning curve.
Yeah, learning curve, and also just you can only put your energy so many places,
Mm-hmm.
right? So over the 4 years that I've been here, I feel like I've kind of built myself back up. And it's nice to let those skills build organically because as we've talked about in other videos, I'm so much more confident in the actual cooking part, the scratch cooking and understanding how ingredients go together, that it almost doesn't matter what I'm cooking on. I'm able to read the temperature in a way that I don't have to say to myself, I'm looking at this recipe and it needs to be at medium high, and my wood stove doesn't have a medium high on it. So what does that mean? And I'm stressed out and I'm just going to go buy a burger.
How far do I have to move it away from the firebox to make medium high?
Right, exactly.
Because that's really what it is. It's by inches on the top of a wood stove versus just turning a dial.
Right. So right over the wood box is the hotter side, and then there's a cooler side further from the wood box. And there's usually a damper that you can use to determine how big that gradation is, how drastic that gradation is. Because if you're, at least for our wood stove, if you're also heating up the oven, if you open the oven damper so that you're also heating up the oven, it'll also heat up that side of the stove. So you no longer have a low setting At that point, that side of the stove becomes more like medium low.
Mm-hmm.
So it was actually learning to cook more intuitively with a wood stove, learning how to understand what needs to be happening and look and see whether or not it's happening. So, for example, is this onion soft yet? And if it's not soft yet, then I need to move it, as opposed to 5 minutes at a particular setting. So I actually feel like that working on the wood stove is something that has healed a lot of my kind of learned ignorance or learned helplessness about food, because there wasn't any other way to do it other than to actually see what was happening and respond to that.
Very true. Very true. So there's lots and lots of ways to cook off-grid.
Yes, not just wood stove cooking.
So you thought of one, because I was saying it wasn't a crock pot, and you said...
Oh, the hot box.
The hot box. And I've heard of Wonder Bags.
Yeah.
And basically a Wonder Bag is a bag that you stick 5 styrofoam beads in, and then it's got a lid that goes with it, and you heat up your food to the temperature you want it, and then you put it in there, and it will cook for another 6 to 8 hours. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we have some folks actually in our Facebook group, in the Skill of the Month Facebook group, who use that hot box technology. You get it hot, and then some people, I think, actually put it in their bed. You put the covers over it.
Oh, nice.
You put it in your bed, and you put the covers over it, and I guess it keeps your bed warm. It also keeps your food cooking. And you have to have whatever that appropriate shell is for your pan, so that it doesn't just burn your blankets. And that's what the hot box technology is, or the Wonder Bag. But it's one of these old-fashioned technologies that's used all over the world. It's simpler than you'd think. There's no energy going into it. It's just a way of keeping the energy that you've put in by heating it up once and keeping your food slow cooking for hours and hours. And we all know that slow cooked food is often the most flavorful and delicious.
And I have to learn it. That's what I have to learn next.
Right, so neither of us have that, actually. Neither of us have gotten that. The other thing that neither of us have, which is definitely in the off-grid cooking category, is solar cooker.
Yeah, we don't have that. We have friends that have used that and have talked to us a lot about it, but I haven't done that yet.
Right, so it becomes this kind of setting your priorities. So once you have a thing that cooks things, it's really easy to just be like, that's what I need, and now I need to move on to the long, long, long list of off-grid. I mean, maybe that's the most important thing to share with you about the off-grid lifestyle and cooking, is that it's hard to make it the most important thing when you're also trying to make all these other things work every moment of every day. It's really easy to let that go.
Yes, quite true.
So small stoves. If you're getting an off-grid stove that might be kind of small, which may affect how you especially bake in it.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. So one of the things that I noticed with Esther is when we'd come to visit, she would be stocking her wood stove for one thing, so it kind of has to be babysat, and then she would turn her pans because one side is warmer than the other, and you don't want one side of your bed to be dark brown and the other side to be beautiful. So you'd have to turn your pans and rotate. That also is true for RV stoves too. And both of those are off-grid things. But if you don't have a modern oven that has the proper circulation around those things, you will have to turn your food.
Sure. Most of the movement of technology has been towards paying less and less attention to these things. So if you reverse that trend, you have to pay more and more attention to things. I think that's a really kind of basic rule. Off-grid cooking is just like anybody's cooking, except you have to pay more attention.
Yes. So a different thermometer. So with an older oven, it's not saying that they're not good, but sometimes the thermostat isn't working exactly the way that it should. And so getting a different thermostat you can put inside the oven is a good idea.
Absolutely. That's definitely been our experience. We tested our wood stove, the built-in thermometer, and found that it was not entirely accurate. So we had a standalone separate thermometer that we would use. And some of you have probably seen my husband with his gun. the temperature gun. That thing gets a lot of use. I'll link it below in case anybody wants to get one because it's pretty affordable and we use it all the time. How hot is that really? Click, click. Um, so yeah,
But you guys also had a dial one.
Yep, we sure did. We sure did. And also, you'll find that there are other ways to determine temperature other than a thermometer. You know, when I was little, my mother always used to throw a little bit of water in the pan before she started cooking. And you don't know why that is until you have a stove that doesn't have medium high on it. And you realize that in order to find out whether your oil is hot or whether your pan is hot enough to add the oil, you need to know, you need some way of judging that temperature. So my mother would set her pan on the stove and then she'd toss a little bit of water in it just from her fingers. And if that steamed in the appropriate speed that she expected, if it made the right sound, then she'd add her oil and she'd start cooking. So there are ways to tell heat, you know, just by what it feels like on your hands or what it sounds like when the water hits it, that really are just as accurate if your knowledge, if your awareness is as accurate. They're just as accurate as a thermometer.
Learn and have fun.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, that's a whole thing to build over time. You can't just pick up that skill in a second. So we've had a great conversation about cast iron over the weekend here on this channel. And it's just, I said this in the other video, my cast iron looks really different from my sister's because she uses water on her cast iron every time and she also lives in like a perfect, immaculate, beautiful home. And I'm not unhappy about the little house. I love my home, but we don't have that much water and the sink's really far away. And a lot of our pans have been burned by setting on a propane turkey fryer for a lot of time. So my cast iron is not anywhere as near as pretty as my sister's is, but they both work. And so if you can just judge your needs by your own standards. So you don't have to say, oh, my pans aren't as clean or my bread isn't as evenly cooked as my neighbor's and so I need to go eat worms. Just say, no, I mean, is this the bread that I want? Is my pan working? Then great, move on to the next thing. You've succeeded.
So true. So true. You can also bring those cast iron pans back to life.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
There are lots of different videos. It does require a little bit of smoke,
Right?
but they can look really, really awesome. So you can find some really good deals at like yard sales and thrift stores with people that give away things that they don't know the value of them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, we do also use stainless steel in our kitchen, but I have to admit that the cast iron has been the thing I like to use the best when I'm dealing with char and possibly even open flame. Because sometimes on our wood stove, we would open the pan burners. There are pieces of iron, because you know that cooktop is also iron, is also cast iron, just like the pan is. And they have these round pieces that are the burners, but you can actually lift that burner off completely and let the fire directly access the bottom of your pan, which isn't necessarily the best thing to do cooking wise, but if you're trying to get a pot of water boiled and your wood isn't quite as dry as it should have been, or you didn't start the fire an hour before, because that's the other thing about wood stove is you have to start the fire an hour before you want to cook, right? You know, I often would pull that off, and then I'd get the char on the bottom of my pans. It's not that big of a deal. There's lots of ways to clean it. Our Castile soap or even homemade soaps that our neighbors have made for us takes it right off. You do want to be a little careful when you're dealing with quantities of ash. If you run water through ash, it turns into lye. That's actually what lye is. So you do have to be a little careful that you're not just running water through ash and then dripping it over your hands. But we didn't have a real problem dealing with the char. I don't feel like that's a negative thing. But I did find that I preferred the cast iron for that reason. Camping cookware for a camping life. So we didn't have as much of the pretty stainless steel stuff.
One thing you can do with your stainless steel is put dish soap on the outside when you are cooking over a flame or something, and the soap will wipe right off.
Is that true?
It's so true.
I just learned that. Now I'm going to have to go and buy some stainless steel. No, I don't have any excuses.
You do go through some dish soap, though.
Right? Okay. So have we covered stoves? Was that everything about stoves?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So for choosing your stove, work from the fuel that you think you're going to have access to, because you're going to have to supply that fuel yourself, and that may be a lot of work or a lot of money, or it may be a commute. So thinking about what that fuel is, and then from there to the appropriate tool, and just as Joanna said, be patient with yourself and have fun learning that new tool. They all have pros and cons. They're all going to work great. So just get used to what you have.
Yeah, everything works. So one of the things about off-grid is winter versus summer.
Right. At least where we live.
So summer can get 90 degrees and winter can get negative 20. So if you are like a super awesome pioneer like Esther and had your wood stove outside, every single one of those meal changes, you would have to go, okay, is it raining? Can I get my stove to that appropriate temperature? And is that feasible to do at that time?
Right. So cooking outside, it's both beautiful and ugly. It has its beauty and it has its ugly. So, I mean, I just have to tell you, some of you have seen videos of it. There's nothing sweeter than cooking your dinner with the mountains spread out in front of you. And so many nights, Nick and I would stand by our outdoor cook stove cooking dinner and just think, wow, we are the king and queen. I mean, we're just so fortunate.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, all those memories are in the summertime. Well, and then there's winter.
Well, and I remember watching a video where he's flipping flapjacks, you know, and his breath is coming out of his mouth, you know, and kids are coming in and out with their shoes on and giving him ingredients and stuff. But it was beautiful. It was beautiful. You just make it a family time, and that's pretty much what you guys knew.
Right. But at 20 below, that's a pretty serious environmental factor to your cooking. Which actually will bring us to another point. We've already talked in a lot of videos about doing food storage, and this is one of the major reasons why I am so into prepared foods, ready prepared foods in food storage. Because sometimes with the lifestyle choices that I've made, I've needed to be able to get something on the table really quickly and with minimal effort. And I don't want that to be something that a company created and used chemicals and testing to find out how addictive it is or what else in it. I mean, I don't want to put my family under that particular risk just to get something to the table quickly. So it's been important to me for that reason to have things that I can cook quickly. But that was kind of a side note because we were talking about cooking inside and outside. The disadvantages to cooking outside are all completely obvious. There's more moisture to deal with at different times of the year. You may have moisture on your cast iron and even on the top of your stove, which can lead to, depending on what you've got out there, can lead to rust or just mess and can be frustrating. And also, if you're working with 20 below, know that that's going to affect your fire as well as your personal experience. So everything that you're experiencing in your body, your fire is also experiencing. And if you have great wood, if you have nice dry wood, then that's going to be fine. Properly seasoned wood, you're going to be fine. But you do need to know how to build a fire quickly, learn a little bit of fire science. I'm not necessarily qualified to teach you that, but lots of other people are. And I can say that at least I have gotten to a point where I'm not terrible at it. So there's hope for anybody.
Kindling is the key.
Kindling is the key. But also, the fire, air is the key. So it needs fuel, it needs air, and it needs a spark. So any one of those things could be the problem. Does it have an airflow? Does it have the appropriate fuel? Does it have the spark? If you're working on learning to build a fire, it's going to be manipulating those three elements in order to achieve efficiency and to be able to get your fire going at 20 below so you can get those pancakes on the table when you really need them most.
Yes, very true. So this summer, I will have my stove outside versus inside. I only have about 500 square feet, and that heats up rather quickly. And then I have some nice south-facing windows. So my south-facing windows heat up my house. Hopefully in the summer I got the angle right, and so won't be heating it up quite as much as it does now. But if I cooked inside, then my house would be really warm all day long. And we're trying to keep it as comfortable as possible for my family who also lives there.
Right, and you also have moisture to deal with, especially if you're canning, which we both do a lot of. Having your stove indoors in the summertime in a small space can be really miserable. So it's balancing that kind of discomfort of your fire at 20 below with the discomfort of your stove inside at 90 degrees, And then also, how hard is it to move your stove? We've made the call on our wood stove that it really isn't moving. We've got it where we want it, and it's going to stay put. But your propane stove, you're going to be able to.
Yeah, it fits in and out of the door, and we have a dolly, and so we'll just bring it out and put up an awning, and we'll do some cooking outside during the summer.
Sounds perfect.
Yeah,
It's a great setup.
yeah, that's what we're hoping.
Mhm.
You know, but I've never done it before. I moved in October.
So we'll find out.
So as much as that sounds like a perfect plan, we'll see.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about refrigeration.
Yes,
That's the other thing we live without in our off-grid life.
yes.
Are you going to do a fridge? Are you buying a fridge?
I don't know. We have access to one.
Uh-huh.
We have some people that say, "Oh, we've got a really old trailer. Just come harvest stuff." And
Right?
and I don't know. I don't know. I automatically went for the propane heat because I was like, "Oh, I can't do the learning curve of a wood stove in October." You know, so I already went for the propane stove. I don't know. Otherwise, I'd be buying ice because wasn't able to get an ice house up. We could have
In
totally,
October? Come on.
we could have totally harvested ice this
Yeah,
year.
yeah.
You know, but it's not something we were able to get to. So that means I'd have to buy ice or just cook with everything fresh. And
Mhm.
we'll have to see how that goes because never done summer cooking off grid before. So we'll have to see.
Mhm.
It's kind of, I don't know, buying propane, buying ice. We might have to look at the pros and cons and costs of that.
Yeah. So I bought ice my first year. I bought ice by the bag full, and it was super depressing. Oh my goodness! I'm like, where is my money going to buy frozen water, which then immediately melts? And we did have a cooler, and we would. At that point, we were still kind of trying to eat the same way that we ate in town because, as I said, I wasn't that confident with the cooking. So, if you are someone who's wanting to move off grid, having these old-fashioned cooking skills, being able to be confident layering flavors and working with ingredients really could have helped us that first year. And Nick's a pretty confident cook too. I mean, it's not exactly the same skills as just can you prepare the meals you've always prepared. It's kind of a flexibility around cooking that I didn't have, that now I have been forced to have, which I'm now trying to encourage other people to value and appreciate because I think it's really worth learning. But all of that was kind of a side note. I'm a little rambly today. To the idea that we were putting foods that we had been eating before, so, you know, a head of lettuce, a block of cheese, in the cooler with a bag of ice. And that really just didn't work. I mean, we tried it and it didn't work. The cheese got sweaty anyway. The ice would melt in the bottom of the cooler and the lettuce would wilt, and it was really not the way to go. So we did a couple of things. One, we really changed the way we eat to eating seasonally. And I've talked about this in a chat with Angela Withers, where I kind of accidentally fell upon some of the eating patterns that she has found through research. We just don't eat refrigerated things in the summertime. So for example, butter. Our family loves butter, and we will buy butter, and we can also make it ourselves. We only eat butter from October to April. And of course, there's all sorts of different ways to go. I'm not trying to say that you're doomed to a life without butter.
No.
But this is how it's happened for us. We do not keep butter in the cooler over the summer because it's not going to work for us. And so that's just an example of how our diet has changed, so that we're no longer keeping things in the cooler in the summertime that are just going to frustrate us and get melted and be a waste. Chocolate chips is another one.
Now you have a cellar.
I do have a cellar now, so I'm going
Ha-ha, chocolate chips, they're safe.
Chocolate chips are safe. But I had to completely let go of candy too. I mean, the same basket that holds my little chocolate candies all winter long that I need to keep my winter from getting too depressing. You know, May comes around and that basket's filled with herbs, which is also great. You know, peppermint is also a really great way to lift your mood. But just to understand how seasonal my life is, that's definitely a part of that.
Yep. So I talked a little bit about ice houses.
Right?
I know Doug and Stacy are building one,
Right.
so watch their videos.
Yeah, do.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
He's got some really awesome ideas. We're not there yet.
Right? We have access to a freezer in town which is Nick's dad's house. And we keep gallon jugs filled not quite to the top with water. And we'll keep a significant number of those in the freezer. And then each time that we go into town, and I want to make it clear that we're not going into town necessarily because of this, we also want to see Grandpa, we also want to be in town for other reasons, we go and we switch out our water jugs. So we're still using ice in the same way that you would if you were purchasing it, but we've made it fit with our particular situation as something that makes sense with what we actually do to be able to have a nice block of ice that's going to keep things cool in our cooler for several days.
And not create a mess.
And not create a mess. Yes. Because that cube ice in the cooler, it's made strong people stumble.
Yes.
Another thing that may be different for an off-grid household is your ability to have water. Certainly it's possible to have running water off-grid, and we both have our versions of running water, and so we're not completely without, we're not completely primitive, but we definitely have had the experience of being primitive, and it does affect your cooking.
Yes, yes it does. So one of the things I have to do is I heat my water on my stovetop. So I have cold running water, but I do not have hot water. And so to do that, depending on how much water I need, depends on how big the pot is. And so sometimes you have to really juggle where those pans are so you can finish the other parts of your meal. And moving hot water is one of the most dangerous things you do.
It really is. It really is. People think that off-grid life is dangerous for various reasons. Moving boiling water is really one of the riskiest things we do, especially if the surface, when I was doing it outside, if the surface isn't flat, if the surface might have ice on it. So it's good to invest in some gloves. That can be helpful in terms of dealing with hot pans or dealing with your stove, depending on what kind of fuel source you have.
Well, and I know I got up, but not necessarily like oven mitts, like the commercial ones that you can get for $1, but like thick welding gloves, even. You know, some thick, nice leather gloves that will hold that heat back.
So it's interesting that Joanna picked up these gloves, because these are the ones that my husband purchased after the oven basically co-opted his other pair. So these really are welding gloves, but they replaced the ones that had become kitchen gloves. So yeah, some safety precautions are probably in order, of course, depending on what you're using. And I guess going back to the water issue, it also will affect your desire to wash dishes. And so you may be looking for some of the same things we've been talking about this whole month of old-fashioned cooking. You may be looking for ways to make your food all in one pot, ways to simplify your meals. You'll notice that when Nick made his biscuits, he used one measuring utensil to measure everything, and he just used his eyes to tell whether it was the right amount. You're motivated by having to carry your water or having some difficulty with getting to your water. It just changes your priorities. It's not better. There's nothing more holy about a life without running water, but it certainly can drive you to make some simpler choices in the kitchen.
Yes, it can. Yes, it can. So, did you want to talk about timing?
Sure.
Okay. So, Esther has an interesting story she was telling me about where getting up in the middle of the night to tend your stove to warm up water for chickens.
Well, and you know what? The chickens aspect was kind of specific, but there's a general idea here. For our life off-grid, different things work at different times. When you are paying attention to a certain system anyway, then it doesn't seem like too much work. And then something changes in your life and it suddenly becomes completely unbearable work. And that's what this story is that when I was nursing my babies, which was for several years, because my babies were close enough together that I was up in the night with somebody every night for years and years, right? Moms know about this. And so I'd be up in the night and heating up some water to be a heat source for my baby chickens, which off-grid, raising chickens off-grid, made perfect sense because I was up with the baby anyway. So, I heat up the water and I nurse the baby and I put the water in with the chickens and I go back to bed. Well, Sadie got to be 1.5 years or whatever it was. and I wasn't getting up in the night with her anymore. I thought, what is this getting up in the night to do water for my chickens noise? What is this, right? I can hardly even consider it now. So I guess what Joanna wanted me to share is just that what works for you really is going to be individual, and it is going to change. And it always comes back to this principle of paying attention and just having an ability to respond to what's actually happening. You shouldn't have to be suffering. You shouldn't have to be in misery. We are doing hard things, but we're flexible enough and we're smart enough to be making them work for us even as the situations change.
Very true. So do your research with any of these things. Do your research, because there's many different ways to get around anything that we've talked about.
Yeah.
There's many, many different ways. So do your research and be excited about the new life or the life that you're living right now, and try new things. Don't be afraid, and ask questions, and get on the comment group, and just share what you know. We'd love to hear and understand and learn more.
Yes, well said. Thank you so much for hanging out with us on the Skill of the Month Club. We're just tickled by it. We're just enjoying it so much. It's a bright spot among other challenges of the world. It's really a bright spot, so we really appreciate you hanging out with us.
Have a great day.
See you next time. It's Saturday's Little House. What does that mean?
Saturday in